Okay, so we are going to dive into looking at grouping quadrilaterals. Okay, so as you can see, there are some familiar shapes that I'm sure you have seen before and probably even know the names of. Now, we're going to start the very top of our hierarchy. Now, when we're starting at the top, we're going with the most general identification, which is quadrilateral. Okay, so all of these shapes that we see all fall under the little umbrella of quadrilateral. Okay, so quadrilateral is a type of shape or polygon. All right, that's another word for shape that we can use. So we're going to be talking about how each of these shapes fall into different groups and why these shapes can fall into many different groups. Now before we get into this, here is an example that I have, okay, it's a little bit different drawing, of something that might help us to understand how the hierarchy works for quadrilaterals. So here I have the top of our hierarchy. I cannot speak today. And let's say we have a hierarchy of girls, okay? And we want to identify them or put them in groups by the girls who have blonde hair, the girls who are brunettes, and the girls who have red hair, okay? So, whether the girls are blonde, brunette, or red, all three of these groups fall under the category of girl, right? They're all girls. But some have blonde hair, some have brunette color hair, some have red hair. All right? So these are now more specific identifications of girls, right? Blondes, brunettes, redheads. Now we can go even further to say blonde, girls with blonde hair and curly hair. So we went from girl to a girl who has blonde hair, to a girl who has blonde hair that's curly, or blonde hair that is straight. Okay? And we do the same for each of these. Now, as we go down our hierarchy, we get into more specific categories. Okay? So, let's say that we're talking about a brunette with curly hair. All right, so she still falls under the category of girl. So she's a girl. She falls under at least one category. But she's also a brunette. So she is both a girl, one category, brunette, a second category, and now we have brunette with curly hair. So we get more and more specific as we go down and follow our lines. Okay? So this makes sense, right? We can look and we can see people's hair color, and we could have chose boy too, but I chose girl, just for this example, right? We can see different hair colors, and we can see curly or straight hair, and you could choose different categories, right? You can get into more and more specifics. We could go blonde, curly hair with green eyes, blue eyes, brown eyes, right? We could get even more specific, and they would fall under more and more categories. So let's go back to our hierarchy of quadrilaterals. So again, our top of the hierarchy is quadrilaterals. So in order to be a quadrilateral, a shape must have 4 sides and 4 angles. So if you'll take a look at each of these shapes, they all have 4 sides and 4 angles. So the angles, again, are these little corners, right, that you see along your polygons or your shapes. So all of these fall under quadrilateral. Now we can get more specific from there. Just like we did with the hair color earlier, we can sort our quadrilaterals into different groups that are more specific. So what qualities allow us to separate these? So we have, of our quadrilaterals, we have kites, parallelograms, and trapezoids. Okay? So, if a shape falls under the category of kite, if it classifies or identifies as a kite, it has two pairs of sides that are equal to each other. So I drew little dashes right here, and I'll zoom in a little bit. I drew the dashes here to identify which sides were equal. So the sides each with one dash are equal to one another, and the sides with two dashes are equal to one another. And you can see different marks like this on different shapes. So, in order to be a kite, they have to have adjacent or side-by-side sides that are equal to one another. So, this identifies our kite, but remember, our kite falls under the category of quadrilateral. So, along with having their adjacent equal sides, it also has four sides and four angles. Okay? So let's go over to our parallelograms. What makes it unique to being a parallelogram? Now again, it falls under quadrilateral, so it has four sides, 1, 2, 3, 4. It has four angles, 1, 2, 3, 4. And it also has two pairs of parallel sides. So parallel sides are the ones that go right next to one another, right? And they keep extending to where they never cross or touch. So they go right beside each other. Okay? So we see one pair here, this side, and then one pair here, this side and this side. So this is what makes a parallelogram unique. Now going over to our third category right under our quadrilateral is our trapezoid. Now our trapezoid has four sides and four angles, but our classification of being a trapezoid is that it has only one pair of parallel lines. So our parallelogram had two pairs of parallel lines, but our trapezoid has only one pair right along here. Okay? So we see that they go this way, so one pair. Alright, so those are our three categories right under quadrilateral, but we can get even more specific. So underneath our kite and parallelogram, we have our rhombus. So our rhombus meets the classifications or the details of being a quadrilateral. It has four sides and four angles, as you can see here. It also meets the classifications of being a kite, because it has two sides, or two pairs of two sides that are adjacent or next to one another. So these that meet at this corner, these that meet at this corner, they are equal to one another. Okay, so we are able to see that it meets the qualifications for a kite. Check. So, but it's also connected to the umbrella of a parallelogram. So think back, what are classification or factors in order to be a parallelogram? It has to have two pairs of parallel sides. So we look at our rhombus. It has one pair of parallel sides and another pair of parallel sides. So it meets the classifications for a kite and parallelogram. Okay, so it falls under 1, 2, 3 different umbrellas. So a rhombus is a kite. You could say a rhombus is a kite. You could say a rhombus is a parallelogram. And you can say a rhombus is a quadrilateral. All right, so when you say that it falls under the category, make sure you follow the lines to the umbrella over it. Okay, so quadrilateral is our big umbrella over all of these polygons. All right, and then the kite, the parallelogram, and the trapezoid each have their own little umbrella. And you follow the lines down to see if the shape you're looking at falls under these categories. If it does, you can say that the shape underneath the umbrella is that shape. So, A rhombus can be classified as a kite. It can fall into that group or under that umbrella. It also falls under the parallelograms umbrella. All right, so let's look to our right. A shape I'm sure you are familiar with is a rectangle. Okay, so what makes a shape a rectangle? Well, it has the four sides and the four angles to make it a quadrilateral, and it has two pairs of parallel lines to make it a parallelogram. But what is unique to a rectangle is, along with having the four sides, the four angles, and the two pairs of parallel lines, it also has right angles. Okay, so you can see our right angles here. I'm just kind of outlining it. Each of those corners make a right angle or a 90-degree angle. So this is what is the additional classification to make a rectangle a rectangle. So a rectangle is a parallelogram, and a rectangle is a quadrilateral. Well, let me ask you this. Would a rectangle be a kite? Okay, so we always follow our lines back up, and there are no upward lines to connect it to our kite. Now remember, a kite has two sides beside one another, or two pairs of sides that are adjacent or next to one another that are equal to each other. So this side of a kite is the same length as this side of the kite. Now if you look here, this side of the rectangle and this side of the rectangle are not equal to one another. So that is why this is not a kite. Okay? So let's go ahead and keep following this all the way down. So last but not least, we have our square. So our square is a kind of rhombus, right? It falls under this umbrella. We follow our lines up. It is a kind of rectangle. You could also say that a square falls under the category or the umbrella of parallelogram. A square also falls under the umbrella of kite, and it also falls under our big umbrella of quadrilateral. So you could say a square is a rhombus, a square is a rectangle, right? A square is a more specific type of these categories. Let me be clear about that. So a square can also fall into all of these because it meets all of their qualifications. What is unique about the square is, along with all of these shapes qualifications, is that it has right angles and all sides are congruent. So congruent means that congruent is another way of saying the same or equal to. So when we say a square has four congruent sides, it means it has four sides that are the same length. And a square also has four right angles or 90-degree angles, which is a qualification for our rectangle, right? Our rectangles have 90-degree angles or right angles, but our rhombus has sides that are the same length. All four sides are the same length, which makes it unique of being a rhombus. So our square meets all of these qualifications, making it fall under all of these umbrellas. Now we go to our third category, our trapezoid. So our trapezoid has one pair of parallel lines, right? We said that at the beginning. But there's a unique kind of trapezoid that is called an isosceles trapezoid. So what this means is that along with having one pair of parallel lines, as you can see here on the top and the bottom side, it also has two of these sides, right? You can see how I've marked them here. These sides are equal to one another, so they are the same length. Okay? So it is a more specific type of trapezoid. So an isosceles trapezoid is a trapezoid. And an isosceles trapezoid is a quadrilateral. But, again, we follow our lines. This isosceles trapezoid does not fall under these other categories. So you couldn't say an isosceles trapezoid is a kite because it doesn't meet the kite's qualifications. All right, so let's go ahead and back this up. So reviewing here, we went from our general category to more specifics. Okay? So we went from general to specific. Now we also went general to specific here, when we went from quadrilateral all the way down to square and isosceles trapezoid. So remember, it must fall under the umbrella in order to be classified as that particular shape. Now, let me give you an example of what you can do and what you can't do when working with classifying or identifying quadrilaterals and different types of quadrilaterals. So, I'm going to give you two statements and I want you to think to yourself which one is correct and which one is incorrect. Okay? So, I can say a square is a parallelogram or a type of parallelogram. Or I can say a parallelogram is a type of rhombus. Or a parallelogram is a kind of rhombus. So take a second to think which one of these is correct and which one of these is incorrect based off what we have been discussing in going from general to specific categories. Okay, so if you said a square is a rectangle or a square is a kind of rectangle, you would be correct. The incorrect statement was a parallelogram is a rhombus or a kind of rhombus. Now, when we're using our is statements, remember, you have to go under the umbrellas. Okay? So in order for something to be a rhombus, right, it has to be classified as a rhombus and meet its qualifications and be under the umbrella of rhombus. So, the reason why a parallelogram is not a type of rhombus is because it doesn't fall under the umbrella. Now, a rhombus has to have equal sides, right? All equal sides. And it has to have two pairs of adjacent sides that are equal to one another. Now, a parallelogram does not have to meet those qualifications. All a parallelogram has to have is two pairs of parallel sides. So, a parallelogram is not always going to be specifically a rhombus, but a rhombus will always be a type of parallelogram because a rhombus always meets the qualifications of a parallelogram because a rhombus has two pairs of parallel sides. Okay? So, these are your notes on classifying your quadrilaterals.